Hello everybody, Shrouded Hand here. It's time for another video where I look at some of history's strangest news stories. So let's jump right in. We're going back to 1906 and we're looking at the Evening Times from Thursday the 13th of December. And look at these prices. Solid gold, 6 genuine ruby doublets with 13 real pearls, $6.50. Wow, okay, anyway, that's not what I'm looking at here today. We're going to check out this story over here. Swallowed a live chameleon. Woman dies as a result of the experiment. A dispatch from Omaha, Nebraska says, as a result of swallowing a live chameleon as an advertisement, Louise Douglas, a well-known actress, died here yesterday. An hour before death, 2 live chameleons crawled from the woman's mouth, and persons say her body is alive with little reptiles. 2 years ago, Louise Douglas, whose real name was Mrs. Harry F. Lee, swallowed a live chameleon and received much advertising therefrom. She has been in the hospital in Omaha for more than a year. The nurse at the hospital in which the woman died is authority for the story that 2 of the reptiles crawled from the dying woman's mouth. Obviously, everything you read in the paper is always completely true. She swallowed a chameleon and then for a year I'm meant to believe that they lived inside her and gave birth, and she was filled with chameleons. So I looked into it a bit more, and this is going to be a little bit of a theme with a lot of the stories in this episode. Some of them are kind of dubious, but they're interesting anyway. The weird thing about this article is there's multiple different versions of this story, all from around the same time. This one's got a bit more of a lurid title, From a Palace to the Brothel. Identification of the woman who swallowed a chameleon and died at Omaha Paw Farm. Louise Douglas, who swallowed a live chameleon and died at the Paw Farm here several weeks ago, penniless and friendless, a woman of the town, was a daughter of Commander Hamilton Douglas of the British Navy, and was by the death of her mother left a large estate in Brighton, England. Miss Douglas was a cousin of the late Premier Duke Hamilton and Brandon, and had run away from her home in England years ago to become a snake charmer and lion tamer. Her mother died of a broken heart in 1905, but remembered her absent daughter in her will, leaving her a large estate. In 1893, Miss Douglas was married in a cage of lions. After that, she went to England and created a sensation in her native land as a snake charmer. On this trip, she visited her parents in Brighton, but turned a deaf ear to their entreaties to give up the life she was leading. Miss Douglas had been in Omaha only a few months when she died. She became penniless, failed to secure employment, and became an inmate of a disreputable house where she remained until she fell ill and was taken to the poorhouse where she died. Just before she died, she confessed to the woman who was nursing her that before she was taken to the poorhouse, she had accidentally swallowed a live chameleon, which had been a pet of hers, and that she attributed her illness to that fact. How does one accidentally swallow a live chameleon? Oh yeah, this one as well from a few days later. Swallowing lizard fake. So the mayor sent a letter to zoologist of Harrisburg. He says he's always maintained that it's impossible for a reptile to live in the human stomach, and that the whole story is ridiculous, but that he must have something more than his own opinion to present to the doubting Thomases of the East. An inquiry at the county hospital brought forth a complete denial of the story of the industrious newspaper faker. There was no trace of chameleons, living or dead, and nothing has been heard of such a thing during the 3 months that the woman was in hospital prior to her death from tuberculosis. One of the associates of the women said that she had once told her of eating a chameleon as an advertising freak. So from what I can tell, this woman did exist. She did die in hospital, it seems from tuberculosis, and she did admit to swallowing a live chameleon at some point in her past. And she probably did think that this contributed to her illness. But I don't think the part about her body being full of live chameleons and them crawling out of her mouth when she died is fact. So one thing I have noticed from researching and looking through old newspaper archives a lot, the amount of stories you find that are just completely made up is insane. So yeah, we'll go on to some more, but bear that in mind as we look through some of these stories. Alright, we're going to 1896. We're looking at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch from Sunday, April the 19th. Swallowed by a monster whale. James Bartley, an English sailor, is a modern Jonah. On the 25th of August 1895, a man in the crow's nest at the masthead of the Star of the East sighted two enormous sperm whales. The steamer immediately gave chase and soon came within half a mile of one of them, a huge male. The two boats, fully equipped in the usual way, were lowered and rowed towards the animal. James Bartley's boat was the nearer, and from its bow was fired a bomb lance which struck the whale in a vital part. The sailors backed water with all their might, but they were not quick enough, for the monster, in the agony of the flurry, seized the boat in its jaws, smashing it like kindling wood. Oh my God, the sailors leaped into the water in all directions. James Bartley, who had been steering the boat, was thrown up with the stern, which for the moment was almost perpendicular. His comrades in the other boat saw him leap, but unfortunately, at that instant, the whale threw himself forward, and the luckless seaman, in falling, struck within the ponderous jaws, which immediately closed over him. Okay, so he was thrown into the air and he landed in the whale's mouth. Right. The men in the water were picked up by the other boat, and the whale was in due time killed and brought alongside the steamer, and work was begun removing the blubber. A day and a night were consumed in the operation. Finally, they opened the stomach. There, to their great astonishment, they found Bartley peacefully reclining as if in a bathtub. He was unconscious but still living. He had been in the whale's stomach for nearly 36 hours. They hauled him out, laid him upon the deck, and they began to rub his limbs, which were purple and besmeared with the blood of his late host. Besmeared. There's a word you don't use much these days. They gave him brandy to drink, and at length he regained consciousness, but his reason was gone. For 3 days he remained in this condition, raving about the deck and calling upon heaven to save him from the horrible furnace in which he imagined he was being consumed. After a while, all the hallucinations wore away, and he had lucid intervals, and then his recovery became permanent. Naturally, the first questions his comrades asked him was what had been his emotions and impressions whilst in the stomach of the whale. "I remember very well," he said, "from the moment I jumped from the boat and felt my feet strike some soft substance, I looked up and saw a big ribbed canopy of light pink and white descending over me, and the next moment I felt myself drawn downward feet first, and I realised that I was being swallowed by a whale. I was drawn lower and lower. A wall of soft flesh surrounded me and hemmed me in on every side, yet the pressure was not painful, and the flesh easily gave way like soft India rubber before my slightest movement. Suddenly, I found myself in a sack much larger than my body, but completely dark. I felt about me and my hand came in contact with several fishes, some of which seemed to be still alive, for they squirmed in my fingers and slipped back to my feet. Soon I felt a great pain in my head, and my breathing became more and more difficult. At the same time, I felt a terrible heat. It seemed to consume me, growing hotter and hotter. My eyes became coals of fire in my head, and I believed every moment that I was going to be broiled alive. The horrible thought that I was condemned to perish in the belly of a whale tormented me beyond endurance, while at the same time, the awful silence of the terrible prison weighed me down. I tried to rise, to move my arms and legs, to cry out. All action was now impossible, but my brain seemed abnormally clear, and with a full comprehension of my awful fate, I finally lost consciousness. The truth of this extraordinary adventure is vouched for by the sailors and the captain of the Star of the East. It appears that James Bartley is a man 35 years of age, of strong physique and wonderful powers of endurance, as have been attested by many incidents in the last voyage just ended. Since the steamer has been in Liverpool, Bartley has on 2 or 3 occasions suffered from old hallucinations and has imagined that he is being consumed in a fiery furnace. It has become necessary to send him to a hospital in London. His general health seems good, but his skin still retains a peculiar bluish tinge which seems indelible and which was doubtless caused by the action of the gastric juice of the whale's stomach. Alright, well, there you go. There's another genuine news story for you. Does that seem likely? Maybe. So this was published 11 years later. The truth about the modern Jonah. So it's a pretty long article. I don't think I'm going to read all this. The Expository Times of Edinburgh has gone to the trouble of tracing the Star of the East. They find that it sailed from Auckland, New Zealand on the 27th of December 1890 for New York. Okay, so yeah, this gives a completely different time for this story. It was hardly probable that the steamer could have got into whaling waters by February, the date set by Bartley at the time of his adventure. But the case against him is now decided by the evidence of the captain's wife. My husband asked me to write, she says in a letter, that there is not one word of truth in the entire whale story. I was with my husband all the years he was in the Star of the East. There was never a man lost overboard whilst my husband was in her. The sailor has told a great sea yarn. So, was this story completely fake? The only thing I can say is, with how dubious these articles are, how do we know that this detail is real? How do we know that the wife of the captain wrote to the newspaper and just decided to confess all and say that the whole story wasn't real? I mean, maybe the captain was just embarrassed about the fact that there was a man overboard incident and it looked bad on him, so he decided to deny the whole thing. Who knows? Yeah, anyway, did a man really get thrown overboard and swallowed by a whale? Another dubious article from the past. Let's see if I can find something definitely real this time. This one's got to be real, right? This one comes from the Maitland Mercury, February the 14th, 1893. A remarkable creature. The most extraordinary story comes from Joliet. It's the account of a killing at the little village of a monster, half bird, half beast, whose classification will puzzle the most deeply learned naturalist. Whilst I have not seen the monster in question, here we go. I haven't actually seen this monster, but I'm going to report on it anyway. For 2 weeks past, the farmers of this village and the neighbouring villages have suffered from the depredations of some beast of prey who nightly visited their sheepfolds and carried off some of their finest lambs. It was generally supposed that a bear was in the neighbourhood, and the farmers have been on alert for the capture of his bearship. His bearship, amazing. On Wednesday of last week, Joseph LaSalle, a big young fellow of 35 years, went in search of the supposed bear, armed with a double-barreled rifle. Some 5 miles back in the woods from the village named, he was startled by hearing a loud croaking cry, and looking upwards, he saw circling high up in the air an immense creature that he at first took to be a monster eagle. Yeah, so he looks up, he sees something massive in the sky, he thinks it's an eagle, right? It's not an eagle. Wait until you hear what this thing is, okay? A terrible battle ensued, lasting for several moments. Then the victory was with the man, and the monster lay dead at his feet. He had now time for a closer inspection of his game, but the thing presented such an awful and unnatural appearance that he was terror-stricken and ran back to the village for help. He was accompanied by his father and 4 other young farmers. The monster was then carefully examined by the farmers, who described it as follows. It had 2 great wings, measuring 15 feet from tip to tip. The head, which was 15 inches in circumference, resembled that of a large monkey. The body was 5 feet long, and whilst the back part was covered with big black feathers, the under part was covered with a fur or a coarse hair. The feet or claws resembled the legs of a wolf, and under the tail feathers was a long appendage with a tuft at the end which looked like the tail of a large calf. Lying with the wings extended on the ground, the monster looked as big as a horse, and when weighed was found to turn the scale at 300 pounds. A team had to be sent for to bring it back to the village. Okay, so they brought it back, and it was seen by Mr. Aldery Charland, a councillor of the town of Joliet. He bought the monster, probably for exhibition purposes, from the LaSalles. On Friday, it was brought by train to his place of business in Joliet. It is now in process of preparation to prevent decay. So I guess they're embalming it or something along those lines. Those who claim to have seen the monster say it is the most extraordinary sight they ever witnessed, and it is hardly possible that all the respectable men who tell the story about it can be lying. So yeah, I followed this story up. I couldn't find anything else really. It's you'd think there'd be more about this. Google's never heard of this story. I found a blog post of someone talking about this story, but they pretty much said the same thing as me. There's like a couple of articles talking about this, and then you don't hear anything else. after that. It's like the thing was disappeared. Maybe the guy bought the monster, took it home and realised it was just a bunch of animal bits stuck together and was like, or it was a genuine creature, and then the men in black turned up and silenced him. It could be real, that one. Could be. I haven't found a debunking yet, so I'm gonna count that one as 100% real. Okay. We're going to the Illustrated Police News. So this is from Saturday, July the 21st, 1883. A very painful and fatal occurrence took place at Leigh on Saturday evening last. In this locality resides an elderly couple who had taken care of one of their grandchildren, an interesting girl of quick, gentle and unobtrusive manners. I'm going to have to translate this. My brain can't handle these old articles. For my own sanity, I've made this a bit easier to read for myself. So, a deeply tragic incident occurred in Leigh last Saturday evening. An elderly couple who lived in the area had been caring for one of their grandchildren, a bright, gentle and well-mannered 12-year-old girl. Her grandfather supported the household by working as a labourer for a farmer who lived nearby. The road between their cottage and the farm was extremely isolated after dark. For a long stretch, the only light came from the farmer's house itself and from a single lamp that hung beneath a large chestnut tree right beside the labourer's small home. Because the farmer produced his own gas, the lamp burned steadily, casting a warm, welcoming glow over a place that would otherwise have felt bleak and forbidding. That evening, the girl had just left her parents' house, which stood about 2 miles from her grandparents' cottage. As twilight deepened into darkness, she hurried across an open field towards a gate. Beyond the gate, a lane ran straight to the farmer's house, where she could see the reassuring light. She had barely crossed into the field when she heard footsteps following close behind her. Panic seized her. She broke into a run. The footsteps quickened to match her pace. Her heart hammered in her chest. Desperate to know whether her mind was playing tricks, she forced herself to stop. Instantly, the sound stopped too. Hoping that it had all been her imagination, she started forward again, only for the soft, unmistakable pat, pat, pat to return, clearer than before. Courage deserted her. Her whole body shook like a leaf in the wind. She wanted to scream for help, but terror choked her voice. Then, through the gloom, she caught sight of the lamp beneath the chestnut tree. With one last burst of strength, she ran down the narrow slope and collapsed, exhausted and barely conscious, right at her grandfather's door. The old couple, expecting her arrival, opened the door at once, and to their horror, the granddaughter fell forward into the passageway. They lifted her gently and laid her on the couch, only to discover she was completely senseless. The grandfather hurried outside to seek help. Almost immediately, he noticed his employer's donkey standing just outside the door. He understood at once what must have frightened the girl so badly. After quickly explaining the situation to the farmer's wife, he mounted a sturdy horse and rode as fast as he can to fetch the family doctor. The doctor arrived within minutes. Stimulants were administered, but a considerable time had passed before the girl showed any signs of awareness, and even then it was faint. In halting, broken words, she managed to tell him what had happened before slipping back into unconsciousness. Moments later, she opened her eyes, looked wildly around the room, gave one violent shudder, and then died. We draw a veil over the grief that followed. It is painfully clear now that the entire tragedy was caused by the donkey following quietly behind her in the darkness. Strangely, she never recognized the familiar sound of its hooves. The animal was allowed to roam freely across the pastures, grazing wherever it pleased, including the very field the girl had to cross on her way home that night. It had simply trailed after her. Alright, there we go. Yeah, a girl terrified to death by a donkey. Let's go have a look at that illustration as well, by the way. I didn't want to show it because it gives away the whole story. That donkey knew what it was doing. Next story, the Evening News and Times. From September the 10th, 1951. Mouse in his stout. Brewery firm fined. A Worcester man took home a pint bottle of stout to share with his landlady with their Sunday dinner. They found it tasted flat and nasty and wondered what an object was in the bottom of the bottle. The object was turned out, and it proved to be a dead mouse. The man, Patrick Durkin, was sick and away from work for a couple of days. This was stated at Worcester Magistrates Court today, while the Holt Brewery Co. I used to work for a Holt Brewery Co. Is this Joseph Holt? Because I used to work for them. The Holt Brewery Co. has been summoned for selling a bottle of stout on June the 3rd, unfit for human consumptions. The brewery were fined £5 and £1 costs. 1951, and they were only fined £6 altogether. That seems a bit low to me. The woman inspector, he said, they've got a woman inspector, okay. The woman inspector, he said, must have been careless and taken her eyes off the machine as that particular bottle went past. This is one chance in billions, said Mr. E.Y. Robinson, defending and pleading guilty. Mouse in stout. That was a story, I guess. Okay, we're going to the Daily Record, a story from the 10th of September 1951. 35-inch rat escaped from show, killed in-house. A rat 35 inches long, weighing about 10¼ pounds, which has escaped from a show on Holbeck Moor. What kind of show had a giant rat on display? I don't know. It escaped from a show on Holbeck Moor, Leeds, and was killed in a private house by an RSPCA official. The occupier of the house in Cresskeld Grove, Leeds, called in the police after he had found the rat tearing up the floorboards and skirting boards. Police tried to approach it and they were attacked. So they had to call in an official from the RSPCA. So it's a giant rat, and it's so big it starts attacking the police when they try and go near it. I need to find a picture of this rat. Okay, so the RSPCA came in, and then with special equipment they were able to seize the rat and kill it. The rat had eaten its way out of a wooden box and was valued at £32. The woman who discovered the rat in the kitchen, Mrs. Florence Hall, said, "I was terrified. My last thought before I collapsed was relief that all my 4 children were out the house and clear of the danger. I'm sure the beast could have killed me with those wicked fangs." Hold on, I've got to find it. There's no picture with the article, but surely 1951 has got to be somewhere. Oh, I found a picture. Here we go. Look at this thing. Fighting house with giant rodent. It's more like a dog. Yeah, I can see now. That is terrifying. look at the guy's face. Serious business. Seems to be a ghost behind the rat as well. I don't know what that's all about, but okay, a giant rat. Terrifying thought. Another silly story here. We're going to The Patriot from the 3rd of June 1913. Oh damn it, how he wants name changed. He thinks everybody is calling to him because he was christened Oh damn it. Elmsford, North Carolina, June 2nd. Orlando Dammit of this village wishes to change his name and has started proceedings to that end. Dammit says that his name has caused him a great deal of worry. For instance, it is a common thing to hear some friends shout, "Damn it, come here a second, will you?" Then again, Dammit says that it is rather awkward for him when his name is being called at lodge meetings. The secretary goes down the list of names, and when it comes to his, he says, "Oh, damn it." Half the time, Dammit says, he doesn't know whether his name is being called or whether the secretary has made a blot on the books. "I'm getting sick of it," says Dammit. "Good heavens, it was bad enough when I went to school and I played on the football team, and whenever I made a good play, the fellows used to give me a long cheer. It went something like this. Rah, 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 hooray. Damn it, damn it. Damn it, oh damn it." Alright, there we go. Only the best news stories for this series. Enough messing around, right? We've got to find some serious stuff. Ravalli for the weekend from May the 14th, 1950. He wouldn't kiss the cat. This comes from the London divorce courts. It was said that a wife demanded that a husband, on returning from work every day, should kiss first her, then her sister, and then the cat. He wouldn't, so she left home. Divorce was granted to the husband on the grounds of her desertion. The judge remarked that the husband might have thought that if he did get her back, he would have had to kiss the cat. There's a few articles on this, they all pretty much say the same thing. The judge agreed that the wife's attitude was unreasonable and granted a divorce on the grounds of desertion. Good. We're going back a bit further now. This is from the Hull Packet and East Riding Times from April the 13th, 1849. Way back. Superstition in 1849. A girl residing at a village a few miles from Raleigh near Ipswich, having been long subject to fits, the family and neighbours decided that the malady was caused by witchcraft, and a cunning man of local celebrity was engaged to dispel the charm. The conjurer undertook the job for a consideration and got the blacksmith to manufacture an airtight iron bottle, which, when completed, was filled with the parings of the patient's toenails, locks of her hair, and some fluid. What fluid was that exactly? It doesn't say, but I can imagine. The whole was then placed in a pot on the fire, being chained to the grate, an additional security against impish tricks. The charm was designed to blow the witch into the air, or to bring her to the hearthstone to ask forgiveness. The spirit of steam, however, got fidgety, and without waiting for the witch, the bottle exploded, blowing away the fire and the grate bars. This was expected to do the girl good. That is the entirety of the story. Was there any injury involved in this exploding bottle? It sounds horrible. 1849 they were doing this stuff. Right. Next story, please. This one comes from the Staffordshire Sentinel from January the 1st, 1898. A Buck's ghost. Black object that looked like a headless woman. The people of Buckingham and neighbourhood are troubled at the appearance of a ghost, the truth of which is vouched for by a well-known farmer living in the neighbourhood. About 6 miles from the outskirts of the town there stands a weather-beaten handpost at the corner of 4 crossroads, and also a small plantation of young oak saplings at the terminus. Near to this spot, some few nights ago, the farmer referred to, accompanied by a friend, was driving his horse and trap along the roadway. The night was well advanced and dark, when suddenly the farmer saw standing a few yards in front of him a black object. "What's that?" he said to his friend, and aloud to the figure, "Hullo there, move on please." There was no answer, and the figure remained almost motionless. It was completely enveloped in a long black sheet, and had the ghastly appearance of a headless woman. Simultaneously the horse saw it, and trembled like a leaf, as if paralysed with fear. The farmer cried, "What do you do there? Move on, please." But there was no response, and the apparition remained still. The horse became restive and commenced backing into a ditch. At this stage the driver's companion got down, took the reins, and endeavoured to back by the spot. Then for a minute or so the queer visitor disappeared. As the trap again faced the roadway, the occupants were greatly alarmed at the further appearance of the black, sombre figure a few yards ahead of them, in the same motionless position as before. Their situation was now getting positively serious. The farmer, whose presence of mind had stood him in good stead, now finding his nerve on the point of giving way, asked the apparition in the name of God to speak. Then it was that the spectre slowly glided away and appeared to float through the thick-set bordered hedge. The animal at once galloped off at a rattling pace towards the village they were bound for. Other people in the district have related their experiences, and the belief now prevails that there is a ghost to be seen, and not a little surprising, the spot referred to has been less frequented of late. Oh, look at this, someone has drawn the picture better than I could. Amazing. Puts mine to shame, but I like that. I'd never heard of this case, but this is pretty interesting. This one is from the Bolton Evening News, February the 5th, 1912. Inventor's death leap from Eiffel Tower. Tragic test of dress to save aviators. An Austrian tailor named Franz Reichelt met with a terrible death on Sunday when, in order to test a parachute garment he had invented for the saving of aviators in danger, he jumped from the Eiffel Tower and was instantly killed. Reichelt had all the blind confidence of the average inventor in the efficacy of his appliance. It was a voluminous garment made of India rubber and stretched taut on a framework of light metal. It was worn like an overcoat, and at the top was a large hood made of silk. When not in use, the hood was folded flat at the back of the garment. By means of a series of pulleys and cords, an aviator threatened with a fall from mid-air had simply to extend his arms sharply at right angles to his body. This brisk movement, the inventor declared, would unfailingly have the effect of elevating the hood or parachute. In this position, it would catch the air in much the same way as the ordinary parachute, and the resistance so created would enable the aviator in peril of his life to jump overboard from his aeroplane and sail gracefully to earth without the risk even of a sprained ankle. Reichelt put his appliance to the severest tests. In the courtyard of his apartment in the Rue de Guillon, he deftly for some weeks past had given exhibitions, and to the horror of the concierge and other tenants, he was wont at all hours of the day to launch mannequins or lay figures clothed in his garment from one of the windows of the topmost floor. So for weeks this guy had just been throwing mannequins dressed in his weird parachute suit out the window. His mannequins, however, however, invariably arrived in the courtyard headfirst and smashed their waxen skulls. Oh my god. Nothing daunted, Reichelt made certain modifications in the appliance, and at last he succeeded in getting one of his mannequins to alight gracefully feet first and without any apparent trace of injury. Reichelt planned a demonstration from the Eiffel Tower, intending to jump down himself. After persistent pleading, the prefect of police gave the inventor permission to experiment with mannequins from the tower. Armed with this authority and accompanied by 2 friends, a band of photographers and a cinematographer operator, the inventor went to the tower but was refused permission to ascend as he had not brought his experimental figures. Having lulled the policeman's suspicion, Reichelt donned his garment and, after standing a moment with folded arms, jumped from the first floor of the tower to the ground, a distance of 306 feet. A moment of intense anxiety on the part of his friends was succeeded by a feeling of horror when it was seen that the parachute garment had failed to act. The luckless Reichelt was dashed to instant death, and his maimed body was found lying with the tattered remnants of his life-saving dress clinging round his back. Interesting. And I did try to find some pictures. This is quite well documented, actually. There he is. Look, that's quite a good picture. This is from the Wikipedia page. It's almost like the modern wingsuit, isn't it? Kind of. I don't see how this is any better than just a regular parachute, though. Oh, there's a video of it. Alright, this is a guy's final moments. I feel a bit weird watching this, to be honest. Alright, there he is, look. Standing on top of the Eiffel Tower. He looks nervous. He's taking his time. He's definitely not sure about this. Oh my god, yeah, I can't show that. No way. That is that's just a man dying. Right, okay. The video's there on Wikipedia if you want to see that. Poor old Reichelt. It's kind of like the very definition of a mad inventor, isn't it? Killed by his own invention, but he went out trying to prove his point and just went wrong, tragically wrong. We're going to finish off with yet another ghost story, although this one is weird because I found 3 different articles and they all seem to say different things. So this one comes from the St. Louis Daily Globe Democrat from January the 22nd, 1886. I better finish off with a good ghost story. Strange circumstances surrounding the death of a woman in Cleveland. The 3-story brick block at number 54 Prospect Street was the scene Friday morning of the most peculiar chain of circumstances which, whether wholly real or part imagined, are nonetheless inexplicable. The 2 upper floors are divided into little suites of rooms occupied by small families and single gentlemen. The room number 10 on the 3rd floor is occupied by a Mrs. Haddon. Last Sunday, Mrs. Haddon's widowed sister, Miss Emily Frayne, arrived from Hamilton, Ontario. When the latter arrived, she was in a fainting condition and remained half unconscious until she was taken to her sister's apartment Thursday evening, while in the hallway outside the room, Mrs. Frayne fainted away. She was immediately placed in bed and became at once very sick. About 3 o'clock Friday morning, she was seized with violent spasms and vomited terribly. A physician was not present and she died a few minutes afterwards. The cause of death was pronounced heart disease. At the moment of Mrs. Frayne's death, an incident occurred in an adjoining room that was at once peculiar and interesting. H. Frank Lamb, a fresco painter, occupies room number 14. He is a well-known young man, about 32 years of age, and is a scoffer of ghosts and spiritualism. His wife is out of the city and he is living alone for a few weeks. He said to a leader reporter yesterday, "I had been to a place of amusement in the evening and came home rather late. I had not drank anything and was feeling very well. It was considerably past midnight when I went to bed." Ooh, steady on, calm down, party animal. Alright, a dim light was burning in the room and I was lying on my back about half asleep. Suddenly, I felt myself firmly grasped and turned halfway over. I lifted up my head and rested it on my hand with my elbow on the bed. I was certainly not frightened in the least, and my eyes were as wide open as they are at this minute. I looked about me, and on the sofa not 2 feet from the bed sat a young woman about 20 years of age. She was a very pronounced blonde, and her hair was long and beautiful. She wore a dress that was figured over with little red, yellow and green flowers, and the sleeves were loose and flowing, after the fashion in vogue 12 or 15 years ago. I gazed at her a full moment before calling out rather sharply, "What do you want?" Instantly, she lifted her right hand, extended it towards me, half shut her lips and said, "Shh, shh." Then she disappeared. How or where, I could not tell. I was not startled, and I was inclined to attribute what I had seen to bad dreams or the nightmare. I turned over again and I tried to sleep. In about 10 minutes, I heard footsteps in the room. Whatever it was walked around to the opposite side of the bed and seized the ticking bedclothes and everything, tipped them over and shoved me out sprawling on the floor. Then I was mad in earnest. I supposed someone in the building had come in to annoy me, and I went out and examined the lock on the door. It was securely fastened, just as I had left it when retiring. I searched all over the room, high and low, behind and in front of everything. There was no one to be found. Then I examined the bed. The mattress and straw ticking had been deliberately pitched over, and they stood up on one side of the bed. Then I went to the door and opened it. As I did so, Mr. Rice, who rooms next to me, opened his door, asking what was the matter. "Nothing in my room," I replied. "It's in the next room," at the same time pointing towards Mrs. Haddon's apartments. I don't know why I did so, but it just seemed the most natural thing for me to do. Just at that moment, Mrs. Haddon came running out crying, "My sister is dead, my sister is dead." Now, as a general thing, I'm always among the first to assist in times of sickness or death, but something told me to go back to bed, and I did. The whole affair is mysterious in the extreme. I have always, and do still consider, spiritualism to be the rankest folly, but it seems as if the events occurring in my room were in some way connected with the death of Mrs. Frayne, especially since I have learned that there may be some mystery surrounding the latter event. Mr. William Rice, a carpenter, occupies room number 13 adjoining Mr. Lamb's apartment. He is an intelligent-appearing gentleman of about 60 years of age. When he was questioned regarding the above occurrence, he said, "I heard Mr. Lamb strike the floor and thought there must be someone in his room playing a joke on him. Then I heard him groping around the room and using some pretty rough language towards some imaginary person or persons. This kept me up so long that I got up and I opened my door. Just as I did so, Lamb's door opened, and before we could speak, Mrs. Haddon came down the hall crying that her sister was dead. Many times before, when sickness or death has occurred, I have offered my assistance, but I do not believe I could have gone through that door to save my life. Something seemed to press me back and say, 'You are not wanted.' Mr. Rice is also a scoffer at spiritualism. Mrs. Frayne's remains still lay in the room occupied by Mrs. Haddon yesterday. She is utterly unable to explain the cause of her sister's death and said that she had been playing with the children only a few minutes before she was taken ill. There is certainly an air of mystery about the matter. The coroner viewed the remains and certified that death had resulted from heart disease." Yeah, so as I say, there's a few different articles covering this story, and some of them say different things. This one is from the Richmond Dispatch. So some of the details you'd think, yeah, they probably it's just a difference in how they tell the story. So he says he woke up and saw a woman standing by his bed, and she said, "Hush, hush." But yeah, this detail is interesting. I don't know whether the paper just made this up to make the whole affair seem more mysterious. Yeah, so Lamb was thrown out of bed. Lamb comes out of his door. He's met by Mr. Rice from the adjoining room. Just at that moment, Mrs. MacDonald opened her door and uttered a cry to the effect that her sister was dead. Lamb says that without the slightest knowledge of why it was so, the word poison escaped from his lips at the moment that he was thrown to the floor. He says that the first word that the janitor uttered when they met was poison. Yeah, the last article says Mr. Rice is a carpenter, and this one it says he's a janitor. I don't know, but apparently when Lamb is thrown out of bed, he says the word poison, but he doesn't know why. And then when he goes out of his room and meets Mr. Rice on the landing, the first word that Mr. Rice says was poison. But then Lamb says, "What did you say?" And Rice replies, "Oh, nothing." A weird detail because it's not mentioned in the other article at all, so I don't know whether this was just added in to make it seem kind of mysterious. I don't know. There seems to be a bit of a follow-up. The Ghost Shrieks. From Heffron's morgue on Detroit Street, a strange tale comes of unearthly weird sounds issuing from the dead house in which the body of Mrs. Frayne lay from last Monday until Friday. The readers of the Leader will remember the story of Mrs. Frayne's sudden death on last Saturday morning at the home of her sister. Yeah, so as it says, at the moment of her death, a man named Lamb claimed that a blonde lady dressed in red was sitting in his room. But now comes the sequel. On Monday afternoon, the body of Mrs. Frayne was taken from the Prospect Street block and placed in the West Side morgue. Undertaker Heffron has not completed his new morgue, and the remains were placed in the dead house in the rear of the undertaking rooms. Next to the dead house is a sleeping room for employees, and next to that, a harness closet. On Wednesday evening, about 10:30 o'clock, William Barker, the nightman, was sitting in the closet, burnishing the plating on the harness. With him was Joseph Carr, another employee of the place, who sleeps in the apartment adjoining the dead house. Whilst the two men were sitting there, enjoying their evening pipes, they were disturbed by pitiful cries, as if someone was in great agony in the dead room. The cries continuing, Barker went into the front office and told Mr. Heffron that there was a sick woman in the morgue. Nonsense, was the answer. There can be no one in the room as the door is locked and I have the keys. Barker was persistent in his statement, and to satisfy the man, Mr. Heffron went to the room and unlocked the door. All was quiet. The body of Mrs. Frayne lay undisturbed in the death sleep. Mr. Heffron returned to his office and Barker to the harness closet. No sooner was he seated than the cries were repeated. The melancholy sounds seemed to have become changed into strange, weird and unearthly moans, as if uttered by someone suffering terrible pain. With blanched faces and hair erect, the two frightened men rushed into the office and confronted Mr. Heffron. The story was repeated, but they no longer claimed that a sick person was crying. It was too horrible for that, and they felt that the noises ensued from no earthly source. They were not to be laughed out of their belief. Carr positively refused to sleep in his room and left the building. Barker remained about the place, but he would not go near the room. Mr. Heffron, about midnight, went to his room in the Adams house. Near 4 o'clock in the morning, the undertaker was awakened by Barker, who declared that he could not stay in the undertaking building. He was sent back, but took a policeman with him for company, and when Mr. Heffron went back to the office at 5 o'clock, he found Barker in the office, still afraid to go back to his work at the rear of the building. The next night, another man stayed with Barker. This man says that he heard nothing strange and scouted the idea of a ghost. Scout? I don't know what that says. Upon being questioned, both Barker and Carr stated that they had heard nothing of the story from Prospect Street, and they strongly maintained that their tale was true. I wonder why that paper added a detail about the poison. I mean, they've got a direct statement from the guy here and he doesn't mention it at all, so I don't know. But this is a creepy story with a follow-up. I just did a little Google of a name. The only thing that came up is this post by Strange and Spooky Cleveland Tours. Apparently they do a ghost tour, and they do tell the story of Emily Frayne, whose corpse was said to scream from the dead room of William Heffron's undertaker's parlour. Well, I guess if you want to see the locations told in that story, then there you go. You go on that tour. All right. Okay. Anyway, that was a look at some weird news stories. Some silly ones, some spooky ones. I just pick the ones that I find interesting and talk about them. I hope you like this format. I do find it endlessly interesting looking through these old news articles, finding weird stories. And every time I find one, I just bookmark it and think, yeah, I'll do something with that. I end up with a load of stories that aren't really enough to make a video on in themselves, but worth talking about. So those are the ones that make it into these videos. So I hope you enjoyed that little journey through history. Thank you for watching. Thank you as always to the patrons. Thank you for supporting my work, and I'll catch you next time. Goodbye.